Matt Hill with Arrowhead Industries.
And I'm Scott Hope.
Got Jason Farmer going to kind of be keeping us in line here on what we're doing. Today we're going to show you how to change an M-23 A or B from a left to a right or right to a left machine. This machine's been prepped. We've taken off all the lids, taken off all the covers, also removed the PV and lock rod. What we're going to start with is controller in, get it all set up and ready to go. It seems to be the most important people have most trouble with. So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to start.
Let's go ahead and throw the machine in its reverse position.
Okay. Start with holding the machine in its reverse position. What we're going to do now is loosen the set screws that hold the indication cams in their place. We're doing this so that we can adjust the indication cams from a right hand to a left hand setup. Some older machines will not have set screws, and in that case all you'll have to do is adjust the cams. We'll have to throw the machine back and forth a little bit here to be able to get to all the screws. What you're going to do now is use a flat screwdriver to pop the cam away from the pin. So you get it pop, go ahead. Throw it here. Okay, that's one side. You don't have to actually rotate the machine to do this. I'll show you on this side. All you need to do is get it popped loose off the pin and actually rotate it to the next pin. Pop back in place. Now what we're going to do is retighten our set screws. I'm using a 5/64 Allen wrench for this. You've already figured that out, means you've loosened them up. There's one. Should be 4 screws on these cams. Now, we're going to throw the machine. You guys need to take our bolts out. We're going to remove the bolts actually that hold the controller into the machine. There's a 5/8 bolt, 2 5/8 bolts at the end of the machine. You're going to have to take one loose, throw the machine, and take the other one out. There's also 2 1/2-inch bolts at the other end of the controller that you also have to remove.
Make sure you leave one in there, because if you rotate the machine without any bolts in it, you're taking a chance on it actually crawling up on the gear and maybe getting off time one tooth.
Okay. Already got loose here. I'm going to take this out. Now what we're going to want to do, if this last bolt is still in, is set the controller up for the machine for a reverse position. That way everything's set for you when you get everything. You've got to throw it reverse. Now we're going to actually use the motor in to get the machine to its complete stroke and motor it out. Now that we have that done, we've removed all the bolts. we can remove the controller. Now we need to remove the lock box. It just sets on some pins on the cam bar. Sometimes they're kind of hard to get out. Lift it out. As you can see, there's just pins. It sets it home. We're going to flip it over. Immediately put it right back in. We'll make sure it's seated all the way down onto the cam bar. We're going to set the controller back in the machine. Careful to get it set down straight onto the pins so that your teeth will match up. Okay. Now we need to replace the bolts to secure the controller. Again, you'll have to throw the machine to get access to all the bolts. Okay.
All right, this time you need to put your machine in the hand position from the selector lever. Put you a nice big.
Install some kind of pin. There's a hole in the plunger to keep it from backing out when we take the internals of the gearbox out. That takes care of our controller in, and now we're ready to move on to the gearbox.
Starting with the pin.
Remove the pin, nut, and washer from the main shaft. Now what we're doing is taking the main bearing off the top. There's 4 bolts. Should be a 3/4 inch socket to do this. Now we want to use a pry bar, pry up on it. It's got some alignment pins. So you'll have to come straight up on it to get it to come off. Okay. Comes off, you'll have a bushing brass bushing comes with the top.
You also want to make sure you grab the Woodruff key.
Once that's removed, we'll now remove your bevel pinion gear. It's also known as your A gear or your B gear, and the spacer that goes with it. What we're going to do now, use a 7/8 wrench to remove what's called the roller studs on the yoke. These just pull out and thread, and the roller will actually come out a separate piece. Now we're going to remove the selector clutch. He put it back down in the motor position to give him some room there. Now what we're doing is removing the eccentric bushings and the bolt that holds them together here. Gotta kind of remove that bushing to get the bolt out. Now the entire bracket will come out. Also a 3/4 socket.
Yoke support.
Yoke support. Try to get all the proper terminology on this stuff so you guys can look it up if you need to. You may have to use a pry bar or something to get that to come off a little easier. Okay. Now moving back to the other side of the machine, we're going to remove the bolt holding the hand throw gear on. It's a little long-winded. Now we're going to remove the bolts and the nut that's holding the selector lever on so that we can remove the selector lever.
Pull your handle off, watch for your ball bearing.
Yeah, there's a ball bearing in between this. Make sure you don't lose it coming out. You're going to want to remember
Socket.
that it should be to the motor into the machine, both coming off and coming on. Now you're removing the selector lever support, I believe. Again, being careful not to lose the ball bearing. I know you guys probably aren't going to be doing this in a shop environment like this. You're going to find it when you drop it. Turn the handle over here so you can gain access to the bolt that holds on the actual hand throw lever. It'll be a 3/8 Allen screw, and you just completely remove. That does actually have to completely be removed. You can't just loosen it up. Now removing the hand throw lever. You're gonna take the bolts out of the lever shaft bearing. All that's just what kind of gives you the support through the gearbox.
Hold that.
Hold the gear. So you can hold the entire thing out. Now we're gonna
Go ahead.
place it on the other side. Some of this stuff may be a little bit harder to remove than what it is for us in here. These have come out already. You're going to line the bolt with the hole there, and there's two guides. Now we're going to reinstall the support bearing and the bolt that holds your hand throw gear on.
Go ahead and leave these two bolts here just a little loose so that you can line up your two bottom bolts when you put it all together, and you can tighten it up after you get it together.
Retighten this 11/16 wrench and a 3/8 wrench. We'll retighten that again to make sure it's tight.
Make sure you line up this groove where your screw is going to go through your hand throw lever. You don't turn your deal this way. No, turn this gear. Keep going.
Reinstall your Allen bolt. important here to make sure your ball bearing is going to be towards the motor end of the machine. It won't work if you don't.
Yeah, those long bolts. You have your two bottom bolts tight. You can go ahead and tighten up your two top bolts. I know everything's lined up. Put in your support first.
Put the support back in. There's no up or down. Either way will work. There is a paper gasket that goes in between here. Should come off when you put it back together. And make sure these rollers stay in place. They do just slide off. So something to watch for when you put it back together. Reinstall your bushings and plate. Then you kind of put that bushing down in there when you're putting your bolt on. Makes it a little easier. And leave that loose so we can come back and adjust it. We're going to reinstall our selector lever. You might have to hold the shaft. You've got enough room to get everything started. Installing a bracket to make sure your pin is in that groove. Side of this groove. Test it, make sure everything's kind of working there. It's in motor position, hand throw shouldn't come up. And the hand. At this point you'll know whether or not you got your ball bearing in the correct place or not.
Okay.
We're going to put our selector clutch back in. If you note on your shaft there's a wider gap. That is for the alignment pin on your clutch. Right here, just a little pin. It will only go on one way. It slides down in. If you got it turned, it will not slide on. Put our roller studs back in for the rollers. 7/8 wrench. His must have been a little easier than mine. Now he's going to adjust what's called his eccentric bushings. What that does is kind of dictates how much pressure the clutch has on it when shifting from hand to power and during regular motion.
Your eccentric bushings have these symbols on them. You got negatives and you've got positives. Normally, you want your negative points will be up. Will get you really close. Sometimes you have to adjust them a little differently. You just want to make sure you got your yoke centered with your rollers and your selector clutch. And you can see you can move it. Make sure you keep your bushings, you know, if you got two positives sticking up, make sure you keep them about the same.
Just try to get even pressure on your clutch. Go ahead, check it. Everything should be pretty smooth with your selector lever. There's not any bounce to it. I'm going to reinstall a spacer.
You want your beveled side down.
And he's reinstalling his bevel pinion gear. Now the timing on it, I'm going to go ahead. You got two timing marks on your hand throw gear, and you should have an L and an R on your bevel pinion gear. This machine's going to be a right-handed gear or right hand, so we're going to put the R in between your. We're going to kind of follow it by hand, letting it fall down. It will not slide on your main shaft until you're where you're supposed to be.
Other way.
There you go.
Same with B.
You can do the same thing with a B gear also.
You're going to tell them to count your teeth.
If you've done it right, you'll be able to count your teeth. You count your spaces in between your teeth. So since you got a tooth in that space, start here. You got 1, 2, 3, and you're at your L. And then you start on the other side, you should have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's your right hand. You can check that way also.
Now we're going to reinstall our top bearing. One of the bolts is longer. You're going to make sure you get it over to the right hole.
Now you put your Woodruff key back into the slot so that you can see it. After you got it back in, then you put your top bearing bushing in, line it up with that key. Then you put your washer. And your top bolt back on. You want to tighten the bolt tight and then back off of it about a half a turn. That way you can line up your hole to slide your cotter pin through.
Remove your pick, allow your motor to work. And you're done. We now have a right hand M-23A.
This time we need to install all the rods.
Yep. This time, reinstall your rods, your covers, and your lids.
Throw the machine, make sure
Yep. You always want to test your machine, make sure everything's working properly. Another thing you're going to have to do is change your nameplates, motor, and hand. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it's always a good idea.
That's it. That concludes.